What's up, everyone? True Techno Gamer back here for another video, and surprise, surprise, we're going to talk about some gaming. I know I've been going more into the home theater front, and those videos seem to get a lot more traction, so I appreciate that. As I sit here now, I'm at like 920 something odd subscribers. So please, let's keep up the momentum. It would be really cool to just hit the 1,000 subscriber milestone, and I'm pretty close. So let's make that happen here pretty soon. But if you guys know me, gaming is still my number one passion, and I'm still going to talk about it. And I know there's a lot of interesting things out there to talk about. So for now, I haven't done a gaming video in a number of months now, and there's reason for that. I feel like it hasn't been a whole lot of really exciting things going on in gaming as of late. I talked about, the layoffs, which is not a great thing, and how, the death of innovation seems to be happening with the software and stuff like that. And it just hasn't been that much excitement, that much movement. But as I really reflect, I'm just going to call this a state of the gaming, industry, type of thing as I record this in August 2024. There are a lot of topics and a lot of things that have come up. I've talked about them in various other forums, and I'm like, you know what? Let me just put it together here for you guys and let you know my thoughts on where things sit right now in gaming, as we enter the holiday season and we get into 2025, which should shape up to be a pretty interesting year, actually. So let's talk about all of that. All right, so here we go. So state of the gaming industry 2024, why do I say it has not been that interesting or that exciting in general? And when I say that, I mean, as we sit here in 2024 and think about this console generation in particular, PC is kind of just, evergreen. It doesn't really have generations in that regard. But still, right, where are we at? And, from where I'm sitting, the biggest issue is this, what I call the stifled software innovation still. Like, the software, the games that are coming out, there are still a number of games coming out, right? But in terms of new, exciting things, especially from a technology perspective, there really aren't that many. There's probably a couple of reasons for that. I think that we're still very much experiencing the COVID effect. All right, the pandemic really delayed things. A lot of studios just slowed their production to a halt in some cases, or at least a very slow trickle. And games that still have not come out, that have been being worked on for years now, that were probably planned to come out around 2022, 2023, are still not out. And I think that's a large reason why. So some of the software that's probably going to push more of the buttons of this generation and try to push the technology and stuff like that are simply just not out yet. But they still will be coming in the next, couple of years still. Talked about, the hardware nowadays being more complex and expensive in general, and we're seeing that across the board, console, PC, everything, right? Look at it this way. We're well into the fourth year of the console generation, and we have yet to see an actual price drop. There have been a couple of times where, one or PS5 or Xbox Series might have gone on sale for $50 off, limited time here and there. But an actual price drop, they're still the same price as they were at launch. Like, real talk. At this point, in the past, going into the fifth year, we're literally at the tail end of a console generation. There might have been 2 full-on price drops by now, right? And we're not seeing that. And the reason is because the cost to build the console hasn't gotten cheaper. That's the reality of world economics today. We see that on the PC front, right? Where, especially on the GPU side, GPUs are just super complex, tons of transistors, but the transistor sizes aren't going down nearly as fast, as they once were. And yeah, we're seeing flagship GPUs that used to be $500 for a flagship GPU 20 years ago are now $2,000, like literally, right? And again, that's not going to change. The cost of memory chips, the cost of the manufacturing, the transistor, the TMSCs, that stuff is going up. So that's a real problem. And it also, I would say we kind of hit a point of diminishing returns in a way. When we look at technology, people want to see this huge next gen jump, and it's like, again, the hardware is more complex than ever, but it takes so much more to get a big, impactful jump the way we were accustomed to seeing in generations past. We just can't see it. Even if you look at, some of the biggest examples, and I've talked a little bit about this, but look at something like, the full-on, path tracing, ray tracing mode on Cyberpunk or Alan Wake 2. Are there differences there? Yes, of course, if you look at it side by side and can really see some things. But in the grand scheme of things, even that, and it takes a ton, that's my point, it takes a ton of resources and power to run that. And you look at it side by side with, with it off, and it's still the same game, the same art, the same, geometric and texture resolution and, geometric detail, all that stuff is the same. Generally the same effects. It's just how lighting is handled, of course, stuff like that. Some different material work here and there. But that's an extreme example. That's the biggest example we can get so far. And again, it's not like, I would say super night and day, considering how much more resources it requires to even get that far, right? That's like, the reality of what it looks like. And we still see that looking at a PS4, a cross-gen game running on PS5 and Xbox Series is mostly in the vein of just performance acceleration, higher resolution, that kind of thing. And I've talked about that before. That doesn't move me and a lot of people, right? We looked at what happened with, Zen 5, AMD's latest CPU. Reviews have been pretty middling, right? In some cases, it's considered a failure and a flop. And again, it's super complex. It's super hard. They're trying to get more efficient and more performance. It's just not easy to do that, even in a 2-year cycle as it is now typically. So the trend that we're seeing, of course, in terms of gaming is being much more reliant on software and now AI, stuff like DLSS and, AI-powered upscaling is almost ubiquitous now with gaming. And most of the, new AAA games, look at Black Myth Wukong, that's literally about to release this week. Stuff like that is literally being designed with, AI upscaling in mind, or at least some kind of temporal upscaling in mind. They need that extra performance in order to get the quality that they're getting there, right? We're going to see that again with other big AAA games like Star Wars Outlaws coming soon here as well. AC Shadows, Assassin's Creed coming later this year. We're going to see that a lot more, right? That, upscaling is almost a necessary thing. So that's where we're at. At the end of the day, the economics is still insane. Like I said, hardware stuff, the price is going up. The cost to make games is getting astronomically expensive. Time is money. And I talked about the effect of the pandemic. If you got delayed by a year or two, as long as you're out there still making a game, not releasing, you're spending money, right? Every second of a game development is money spent, right? To pay for computers, pay for servers, pay for, keeping the lights on in your facilities, and of course, paying the development studio, right? The people that are making the game. It's not in a developer's interest to delay a game or just sit on a game for years and years and years, as we've been seeing. That's not cool. What that really means is the cost is going up and the stakes are higher for them to, achieve success, basically. So we're seeing that in a lot of different places. And that's still, I think, partly the effect of, what happened with the pandemic and such too. So that's a real thing. I've talked before about, just the constant remasters and remakes that we've been seeing too, which really is probably one of the most disappointing aspects of this generation, and we're seeing that across the board, but I'm gonna really call out Sony on this one too, because if you look at their first party studios in particular, you look at a company like Naughty Dog, which is one of their premier first party studios historically, right? Uncharted, Jak and Daxter, Last of Us, right? And Crash Bandicoot, right? Back in the day, right? PlayStation staples. What have they done this generation? 4 years in. 4 years in, I'll tell you what they've done. They have done absolutely nothing but release remasters and remakes of their existing games, most of which just came out a generation ago during the PS4, right? Literally, Naughty Dog has released Uncharted 4 Collection, which was a remastered version of Uncharted 4. Last of Us Part 1 remake, they call it, but it was pretty much a remaster, to be honest. And then, most recently, The Last of Us Part 2 remastered. That's it. And why are they releasing that? They've got to release something literally to pay the bills to keep their lights on, while they try to build, hopefully a new IP or original IP for this generation. But in the meantime, in 4 years, this is the same studio that in the PS3 generation, from 2006 to 2013, a 7-year period, they literally released an entire trilogy for a hugely AAA blockbuster movie-like game in Uncharted. They released Uncharted 1, 2, and 3, and introduced a new IP in The Last of Us in a 7-year period, which means they were releasing games roughly every 2 years. On the PS3, which was like one of the most difficult generations, right, to build games on. This is what that studio is capable of in the past. This is what we got. Remasters and remakes. This is pretty much the story across the board, right? What has Sucker Punch released this whole generation in 4 years? They haven't even announced what they're working on. There's rumored they're working on a Ghost of Tsushima 2, which should be awesome, but they haven't even announced it yet. What have they released? Ghost of Tsushima Definitive Edition, I guess, whatever they call it. It's basically PS5, kind of a PS5 remastered version. Higher frame rates, higher resolution, stuff like that. And then other than that, we got some cool games from Sony first party, but a lot of them were cross-gen, meaning PS4 as well. Horizon Forbidden West, great game in my opinion. One of the staples, because they really did go into the PS5 hardware. Like the PS5 version is pretty distinct from the PS4 version in that case. Great game, but it is still cross-gen. It's not them really going in and building a game from the ground up on PS5, right? Similar with Gran Turismo, Polyphony. Gran Turismo 7, I have said this, and I may be in a minority, but I don't care. I think GT7 is an absolute great racing game. I think it's the best Gran Turismo game that they've ever released. I think that it on the PS5 version, again, they went way in on the hardware there. It is really distinct from the PS4. They took advantage of everything that the PS5 has to offer. Great, one of the best examples of ray tracing we can see on a console today. For native 4K, 60 frames per second. Great material work and lighting and SSD. The navigating the menus, getting in and out of races, super fast. It's a great racing game. If you ever like Gran Turismo, it is to me the accumulation of that franchise. But at this core, it's still a PS4 game, right? It's a cross-gen game. That's reality. God of War, Ragnarok, Santa Monica. I think Ragnarok was honestly a pretty noticeable step down in quality from the first God of War game that they did. Not the very first one, but the God of War 2018 version, right? Which to me is one of the best top 10 probably games ever in my humble opinion. But Ragnarok was not that. It just did not hit those same highs at all. But still, cross-gen, right? It was a PS4 game that was ported to PS5. And again, PS5 had great advantages, much better performance, and much better resolution, blah, blah, blah. But at this core, it's still a PS4 game. So, Sony first parties are typically the studios that really define, particularly a PlayStation generation. But I would even say, in some cases, just the generation as a whole, in terms of what that platform, what that generation, what that technology, what that PlayStation console is capable of. We've seen that, right? If you look back at the PS3, if it wasn't for the Uncharted trilogy, Killzone, even Resistance, I would say Motor Storm, Little Big Planet, Infamous, which was the unveiling of that franchise. If it wasn't for games like that, like we saw really what the PS3 was capable of, from physics, from computational standpoint, obviously from a graphic standpoint as well. And God of War 3, of course, how could I forget? Pretty amazing stuff, right? And that was Sony's first party. Even in PS4 generation, we saw Uncharted 4. We saw The Last of Us Part 2. We saw Days Gone. We saw The Order 1866. 1866, 1886. You guys, you know what I'm talking about. But say what you want about the game, but the technology, the graphics in that game for a console especially was insane. Infamous Second Son, Killzone Shadowfall. When people first saw Killzone Shadowfall at the PlayStation meeting, that was when it was clear we're in a new generation. This is beyond PS3, right? I mean, that's what Sony first party typically does. And they haven't done that yet, right? At all. So, I want to talk about this because there's still a lot of talk about well, this generation hasn't really begun. You know, a lot of conversation around the PS5 Pro. Do we need a Pro? And what we don't need a Pro because this generation still hasn't really done. We still haven't seen what the PS5 can do, and that kind of stuff. And I want to talk about that for a minute because there's a lot of interesting conversations there. I think that's a loaded question, right? Do we need a PS5 Pro? Do we need more hardware? Is hardware the issue here in terms of what I'm talking about, stifling of games, how long games are taking, the quality of games, just the repetition, right, and regurgitation of ideas? That's not a hardware problem, guys, right? I mean, right, having more hardware, having newer hardware isn't necessarily going to change that, or is it going to fix that, right? You can have as many teraflops as you want. It's not, if anything, that's going to make it worse because that means that in order to take advantage of that power, you need even more time and even more money, right? So I don't think that fundamentally that's the main things that I'm talking about are hardware issues. But there's kind of two, I think, ways to really break this down. The first, when people say, well, this generation hasn't started, what does a new generation really bring you? The first thing is kind of like a new artistic canvas, right? For artists, for game creators as an art, right? New tools, new capabilities means that developers have a new canvas. They have new technologies, new things they can do. For example, HD resolution was kind of like a new way of, constructing your game and your rendering and your graphics pipeline. Programmable shaders, right? That's an example of a technology that enabled developers to create new, from a graphics standpoint at least, really different looking and new looking, experiences there, right? PBR, materials. That was kind of the big thing for the PS4, right? That physically based rendering. It made materials look very different. When you saw in Uncharted 4, the skin, the metals, especially in the interiors of that game. Assassin's Creed Unity is another great example of that. A lot of games in the PS4 generation, that's where we saw PBR material. So that's a new technology. HDR, right, is again another technology that can give developers and artists something new on their canvas to explore. Obviously, something as crazy as going from like sprites to 3D polygons, way back in the day. That obviously was a new thing. So I'm just giving you some examples of what I mean. Like, new generations typically can mean whole new technologies that can enable new types of ways that a developer can express themselves. In some cases, new types of ways of realizing a game, whether it's visually, whether it's from simulation, stuff like that, physics, stuff like that. Just a new canvas, right, to go further. Now, in that regard, that's not about teraflops, because I'll give you another example. Something like the Wii was a really new canvas for game developers, right? It wasn't about super high power polygons and textures and memory. Wii was basically a GameCube level hardware. Even for that new generation at the time. It was way below the PS3 and the Xbox 360 at the time. But the motion controllers, right, was a whole new paradigm, a whole new artistic canvas for game developers to make their games and make their gameplay experiences. That's a new generation. It's not about, again, pure hardware, but that's a new thing. So in that regard, if you understand what I'm saying there, I would say that I agree. This generation hasn't really started because we haven't seen game developers, by and large, really go in, like I said, and design a game from the ground up to take advantage of what a PS5 or Xbox Series X level hardware can really do. Right now, in some ways, game hardware, console hardware is less bespoke than they ever have been. Meaning they're not as unique. There was a time where every new generation of console was its own closed, ecosystem and whole new platform that developers had to learn, and whatever capabilities it had and whatever features it had was pretty unique. You wasn't going to find that on PC or even in arcades or anything like that. And as you did that, you took advantage of a lot of this stuff, right? And you kind of created these somewhat unique experiences. Now, consoles are basically just dedicated PCs, right? Customized PCs, AMD hardware, CPU, GPU, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of like there's being something, the special sauce, right, in the consoles now, obviously is not not nearly what it once was, right? It is basically just a optimized PC. But I will say that the one technology that really, on the PlayStation side in particular, Sony has been very clear about this. They have marketed the PS5 experience not around, resolution and 4K and whatever. They haven't really, I mean, they'll mention it in cases, but they have three pillars that they've always talked about in terms of what defines a PS5 experience this generation. And let me reiterate that for you guys. One, the SSD, whether it's fast loading or, just having the SSD, by the way, gives the I/O throughput in the PS5 is 100 times what it was on the PS4. 100 times. Okay, it is the single most biggest jump or leap from a hardware perspective in this generation, right? And that's not the kind of leap we typically see in any regard. Memory, GPU power, CPU power, we're talking, right, like 2, 3, 4x, 5x maybe, right? We're not seeing anything approaching 100x. So that's what the SSD, potential and promise is meant to be. So that's one. Two, the haptic feedback, the DualSense controller. That's been part of the PS5 experience, and it's been pretty cool. Not something that you necessarily will see in the similar way on a Switch or Xbox or PC for that matter. Although some PC games now, PlayStation's on PC, whole nother thing, and you can get some of those effects as well on PC, of course. But that was two. Number three was the 3D audio, the Tempest audio, and I'm gonna talk more about that. Okay, those are the three pillars. Now, from a graphics standpoint, the big thing, the new thing this generation is supposed to be ray tracing, right? Pushing more pixels, pushing more frame rates, nothing new. All right, every console generation does that. And technically, we had PS4 Pro, we had Xbox Series or Xbox One X. PCs obviously can go as far as you want to go with that, 8K, 400 hertz or whatever, right? So that's not that new stuff. And Sony in particular realized that. And they never really marketed like, oh, PS5, 4K, 60, 120, whatever. It was those three pillars, okay? Those are the things that they want artists to take advantage of. 3D audio, haptic feedback, and the SSD. And then ray tracing is kind of like, I guess, a 3.5. There, three and a half things there in a way, right? And to that effect, again, that's what going in on a PS5 experience is really about. And we haven't, again, Sony's first party are the ones that need to really define that. The Xbox first party studios, Xbox has an SSD. It's not quite as fast, but they do have, obviously, SSD. They technically have 3D audio capability, although it's not really done in the same way. A whole other thing. The controller isn't really something that's pretty new on the Xbox side. So their thing is this, hey, Series X, scale up your Xbox experiences. You get the best console experiences at up to 4K 120. But, their games come out on PC as well. So, it is what it is, right? But that's what we want to see. That's what I want to see. The SSD in particular, if you really were to design a game around having that much bandwidth, that much read and write, bandwidth, there was a lot you can do. And that's what Mark Cerny talked about in that infamous road to PS5 from GDC of 2020. That was the promise of the PS5 generation. We've seen fast loading, of course, in some games. We've seen instant load. We've seen fast travel. We've seen a lot of that. We have seen more deeper, denser streaming as well. We're going to see a lot more of that too in some of these newer upcoming AAA games over the next, year or two. We're seeing there's things like being able, like Spider-Man 2, how he's able to fly through the city. Star Wars Outlaws, we're seeing like basically, seamless ground on the planet, ground to space traversal. That's the SSD, right? Another great example of the SSD, if you guys have seen the latest video, or I think there's a gameplay video of like Marvel Rivals, which is kind of like the Overwatch hero-based, online game based on the Marvel Universe. And in that game, you're playing, I think it's like, what is it? 5v5? I'm not sure exactly. But you have like 10, 12 characters online playing in these arenas, doing all of this stuff. And Doctor Strange has this ability where he can create a portal like he does in movies and everything, right? And the portal opens up another aspect on the map. Now, all of the dynamic gameplay is happening on that other part of the map. And when he does the portal, you can literally see that other part of the map being rendered seamlessly right then and there. And you actually can walk through it and instantaneously traverse to that other part of the map. In the middle of an online gameplay with that many things going on, That's the power of the SSD. You cannot do that nowhere near in that way without the SSD. That's just an example, but we are seeing games utilize the SSD more. But again, going all in on it, I'm not sure we really have seen that, right? That's what the promise is. To me, the SSD in particular is the main artistic thing that can really change how a game developer approaches making a game this generation, right? So that's what I would like to see. And in that regard, if you combine what I just said, again, SSD, ray tracing as well for the graphics side, we haven't seen it. The haptic feedback 3D audio, we actually have seen pretty much every PS5 game take advantage of those things in some way. So that's pretty good. But the other two, we still need to see. That's the first piece of where we talk about this generation hasn't started yet. The second piece, when we talk about this generation hasn't started yet, is kind of more what a lot of people, I think, to associate with that phrase, or the first thing that comes to mind. The pure performance acceleration aspect, right? The pure horsepower behind the machine. Well, in that regard, it's really not that hard to tax out any hardware. I mean, it's all software driven, right? You can write bad code on a 4090 and saturate a 4090 and have it stutter, have it be a low frame rate, right? Or just, not even bad code, but just have a lot of complex code. We're seeing that. Some games are really, really taxing, even on a 4090 PC. Some of these newer games, like Black Myth Wukong, has some really, really high requirements, especially if you want to maximize it and go all full ray tracing and everything like that. That's not hard to do. So yes, of course, 4 years in, yes, there's plenty of software that you can say, pushing the PS5 or the Xbox Series to the point where, we got a lower resolution now. We get lower quality and, lower IQ, image quality, lower performance, whatever. You can always do that. So in that regard, which to me, again, isn't the really interesting or unique aspects of a new generation at all. That's something that just always goes. Again, PC every 2 years, right? We get new generation GPUs, new generation CPUs. It just keeps going further. All it does is accelerate the core game that the artist created, which could have been created for a much, much lower spec. It could have been created for a PS4. It could have been created for a Switch. Could have been created for mobile. And you can throw that on a 5090 and it will accelerate the hell out of it, but it's not changing the game. The game is still made here within this envelope, right? And you're always going to have more and more, hardware around that. Not very interesting. So when people say, the PS5 is taxed, the Xbox, we're 4 years in. Yes, there's software out there that, can push that, given that there obviously is hardware in existence that go, beyond those specs. So when game developers are making, they say, we want to push 4K with this complexity, with this geometry and these shaders and blah, blah, blah. They're working on it to say, we want this to run like, on a 4080 or on a 4090, right? Or a 7900. If you do that, it's going to tax those PS5 and Xbox Series level hardware. Duh, right? So in that regard, we always can go further. We always can use a more powerful console theoretically to just accelerate more. If you really care about pixels counts, if you really care about resolution and frame rates, you can do that. But that's, again, not really the core, the interesting thing about a generation, of what defines a generation. Resolution and frame rates, there were 60 FPS games back in the Genesis Super Nintendo era. Right? Like 60 FPS isn't anything new. Higher frame rates isn't anything new. Pixel counts are just pixel counts. They just go up. And they get to a point, as we see now, between 4K and 8K where the difference is barely perceivable, right? And we were kind of getting to the point of just saturation for how visual technology works today. Monitors, TVs, and our eyes work. 4K is pretty darn good, right? Good enough. So not very interesting. I just want to stress that, because people talk about that and say, again, hardware is never ending. It's going to keep going. And just because a particular game runs poorly on a piece of hardware doesn't mean we need new hardware. We need a new generation, right? It doesn't mean that at all. It's software. A developer can make a game right now today that can run at 8K 60 on a PS5 if they wanted to, right? It wouldn't look like Black Myth Wukong, right? But they could. I mean, if their game design, fitted, if they wanted to make a new version of Tetris or Pac-Man, stream examples, right, or something like that, it can run at 8K 60 if they wanted it to, right? So when a game isn't hitting a certain performance spec, it's usually on the software, on the developer, which again, software is super, super hard, game software, super hard. And nowadays, game developers are making games for everything, because that's another trend in 2024. The new mantra is play anything, anywhere, right? So a game developer is making games on console, multiple consoles. Xbox splits their thing with the Series S and X, which is a real divide, trust me, that developers have struggled with, because you have to make a game that runs on the Series S. You can't target the Series X only. So as you make your game for the Series S, and then the Series X accelerates it further, you get more resolution, you get more frame rates, potentially stuff like that, right? And maybe some more, effects, longer draw distance, texture, something like that. But you're making a game for the Series S. On the PS5, you got one PS5, but you make your games, right? Make your games for that. So you will never see every game run at 4K 60 or 4K 120. I hate when people say that. Get over it, guys. You don't understand how this stuff works. That's software. That's the software issue. You will never see, no matter what hardware, a 7090 from the future. Okay, no game will just ever run. All games will not all be at the same spec. Right? You can make a piece of hardware and say that every game that's currently in existence may be able to hit a certain spec. If it's powerful enough, in theory, you have enough overhead, you can say, oh yeah, this, can hit. I mean, I'm sure most games can run at 1080p 60 on a 4090 today, for that matter, right? But that's not what happens. We want to push more resolution. Games are going to get more complex, and they're not going to run equally the same on every hardware, and it's impossible for a game developer to really account for all of that, given the complexity of game hardware. So, no, right? It's just not going to happen. So that need for more hardware there is honestly just an unquenchable thirst, right? That gamers always talk about. And that's not really the problem statement, right? So is this generation peaked? Is it kind of already old because we're seeing games push PS5 and Series X to the point where they have to reduce resolution so much, or performance is more unstable or lower, blah, blah, blah? No, that's software, guys. So yes, a PS5 Pro and a new generation, of course, of hardware will make these current games run better, right? PS5 Pro will probably be able to push some 60 or more 60, more 120 hertz games than the base PS5 can, for sure. But it's still the same game. It's still the same piece of art. It's still the same models, still the same meshes, still the same effects, still the same textures. The artist's work is still the same, right? Right? It's just accelerated more to give you potentially a better play experience. Okay, but that's not really what defines a generation. So has this generation peaked? Even that, I would say no, because first of all, we are going to see more, additional hardware. But second of all, I would say that a lot of game developers still haven't, there's still a lot of optimization work going on in UE5. There's still custom engines being built for this generation that haven't released yet. Like I said, everything that got pushed back, got delayed. So even that, I would say, hasn't happened. But, do we need new hardware? Do we need a PS5 Pro? Absolutely not. We don't need it. We don't need a new GPU, right? Or a new CPU every 2 years, but people do it, right? People are going to get the PS5 Pro, to my point. But the artists, work in terms of what they can do this generation, we haven't really hit that stride at all. We have not. And there's still a lot of games coming out, a lot of engine work being done to take advantage of the SSD, to take advantage of ray tracing and stuff like that in ways that we haven't seen yet. Now, to that point, if you look at some of the upcoming games now, though, we are seeing that as a trend. Again, there's more utilization coming from the SSD. There is more ray tracing coming. Just look at, the games coming this year, which, by the way, are honestly pretty anemic, I would say. Same sequels, for the most part. This month, Star Wars Outlaws, Black Myth, Wukong are two kind of new big games, AAA games. So that's cool. We are seeing, again, a lot more of these games are going to be doing things with fast loading, doing things with higher, faster streaming and more streaming. Like I said, Star Wars Outlaws is a good example of that. We're seeing that. Black Myth is a UE5 game, and it's doing ray tracing built in, even on console. Black Myth, by the way, also does ray tracing on console. It uses UE5, so it uses Lumen for GI and for reflections, right? So AC Shadows is another game. I'm cautiously optimistic on that one because this is finally the first Assassin's Creed game, I think, where they have really done some work to the engine to bring it up to snuff, to latest standards. It's still basically Anvil, but it's kind of like a new version of Anvil Next, if you speak. They haven't done that since Assassin's Creed Unity, right? They've basically been using the same engine at least since Assassin's Creed Unity. And Assassin's Creed Unity was, to me, gosh, just one of those tentpole next generation moments. Even seeing that trailer, but even playing that game, even on a console, even on PS4, 30 frames per second, of course, 900p, wasn't even 1080p, I don't think. But again, that's not what it's about, right? The art, the work that the developer did, the models, the scale, the crowd density, the PBR materials, the lighting, that game was just like, wow. Cautiously optimistic on that one, right? But again, we're going to start seeing that, of course, leading up to GTA 6, which should be out hopefully next year on consoles. And that's going to be the peak of this generation, because as in typical Rockstar fashion, GTA is going to be the accumulation of what an open world can be on this current gen. SSD, ray tracing, of course, haptic feedback, 3D audio, everything will be utilized to full effect. And then, just this huge, vibrant, dynamic open world that's going to sell a gazillion amount of copies. GTA 6 is going to be the peak of this generation, period, next year. And that's kind of what we always see. So I would say that's when we peak. In theory, I would say that, we're going to see more and more. It's slow because we're going into year 5, but we are going to see more games taking advantage of what this console has to offer. And again, there's a slew of UE5 games. If you've seen some of the trailers that look amazing, people are like, whoa, that looks crazy. That looks so much next gen. UE5 is going to really start coming into its own and, getting more optimized as well. And having like the Pro available for consoles, gamers, you'll be able to play those, most of those games too with really high quality at least 60 frames per second for sure. Even if, the base PS5 has to drop resolution, and have unstable frame rates or something like that, right? You will be able to get the full UE5 experience on console in theory with the Pro. Like I said, that's why I said 2025 should be a pretty interesting year. Both Sony first party and Microsoft first party, I think we'll start to see, again, Microsoft, Indiana Jones, Doom, Avowed finally. I don't know when Perfect Dark exactly is coming out, when Fable's coming out, but these are things on the docket for them. Big, first party games on their end. And then Sony, they haven't announced. We don't know. We know that Ghost of Tsushima 2 is probably coming from Sucker Punch. Naughty Dog is working on something. Insomniac, which has been the one company holding it down for PS5 on the Sony front, with Spider-Man and Ratchet, Clank, and stuff like that. They're working on Wolverine. They're also working on Spider-Man 2, some Spider-Man 2 DLC around Venom, most likely. So we'll see some of that stuff next year for sure. What has Sony been working on? We might see that. What is Bluepoint working on since Demon Souls? What is Housemarque working on since Returnal? Right? What is Polyphony working on? Is it a GT8? Is it something else with GT? I mean, there's a lot, right? What is Santa Monica working on? Is it another God of War? Is it something else? There's a lot of studios at Sony's camp. There's a lot of big guns. We just don't know. Obviously, we're not going to see all of it next year, but next year we should start seeing some first-party output built from the ground up for PS5 to hopefully show off what this generation can do. And then, of course, GTA 6, like I said, next year, big gun. PS5 Pro should be out, if not this year, early next year. So that'll be a thing. New generation of GPUs to be out on the PC front from AMD and Nvidia by next year, right? 2025, right? It's definitely something to look forward to overall in that regard. And like I said, hopefully the software catches up, man, because just look at what people are playing. Like, whether it's PC, look at the latest Steam numbers, look at the latest PlayStation, PSN, data for top 10 games played. I mean, can't make this stuff up, right? It's literally, first of all, it's the games obviously that aren't taxing the hardware at all. So back to the point. Is this generation taxed? Is it already old? Is it stale? Do we need new hardware? No. If you're Sony or Microsoft from that vantage point, or even Nintendo, and you look at what people are spending their time and their money on, look at the list. It's games like Fortnite, Warzone, which is probably the most technical game on there. But again, Warzone is a cross-gen thing, right? It's built for, last generation consoles, PS4, Xbox One. So not exactly taxing, this current generation of hardware. FIFA, soccer, NBA 2K and Madden, and then games like Multiverse and Rocket League is still up there, right? Like X-Defiant is a new shooter, but again, it's not really pushing technically, anything. Rainbow Six Siege is still up on this list, man. Like Roblox, of course, is always up there. Fortnite and Roblox are just, this is what people are playing. And you can't look at this list and tell me that, again, we need a new generation of hardware. For what? To push these games from 60 and 120, even on console, up to what? TVs max out at 120. Like, what are we doing? Right? What you don't see on this list are something like Alan Wake 2 and Stellar Blade and Rise of the Ronin and even Final Fantasy, Rebirth, and those type of games are probably not going to be on lists like this, right? So PC games are still playing Counter-Strike, right? And League of Legends, right? And games like that, Fortnite still, and Minecraft. This is what people are playing. This is where we're at. And again, some of these games are literally 10 years old or older. Or at least franchises that are, again, NBA 2K and FIFA, soccer, Madden, probably will be on here later. And, that's just the same old, right? And they're not really pushing the envelope too much either. So, guys, just keep perspective here, right? Like, when we think about that. And honestly, for me, it's somewhat frustrating, like I said, because I remember generations of old. I remember, seeing, Final Fantasy X for the first time, right, on a PS2. Seeing GT3 for the first time on a PS2. Seeing Super Mario 64 for the first time. Seeing Star Wars. What was it? Star Wars, like Rogue Galaxy, I think it was, right, for the GameCube. When you first saw that. Seeing Halo for the first time on the Xbox. Seeing Oblivion for the first time on the 360. Seeing Killzone 2, on the PS3. Those type of tentpole experiences, I miss them. We haven't really had them this generation. I don't think we will have them this generation. And I don't think we ever will again with the way the industry is, with the way the model is now. With everything being like cross-platform, cross-compatible, you lose some of that. Microsoft is literally building their games for PS5 now. And we're going to see a lot more of that, right? We've seen some games come out on PS5 already. We're going to see more of that. Believe me, Xbox first-party studio games, a good number of them are going to be coming to PS5. That's a good thing in a way, right? Yeah, more gamers get to play it. I get all of that, for sure. But it is just a fundamental flip on its head for how the console generation has operated for the last 40 years. I'm just saying, right? This is something to get used to, right? Sony is now building their games for PC. PC is becoming a first-class citizen. They're still trying to get some value to the console by delaying the games to the PC. Most of them are not coming day and date. They went from that to saying, okay, well, if it makes sense. So if it's a game that's like online and requires a big community like Helldivers, like Concord coming out later this month as well, we'll put that on the PC day one because they want as many people as possible. But something like God of War, single player focus, something like The Last of Us, single player focus, no, console first, get your experience there, then you get it on PC later. Spider-Man 2, probably falls into that same kind of category. The single player games, right? We've seen Spider-Man come out on PC later. Horizon as well, right? So, but still, it's a big thing that they're making games on PC as well. And PlayStation has always been this really, really bespoke hardware. And now developers have to think a little bit out the box and think, okay, well, this has to run on a PC as well, right? It changes how they have to approach their games. That's the world we live in now, guys. So someone like me, again, who misses the wonder of those console generations, it is kind of sad to see. For someone like me who, used to get off on seeing some of those tentpole titles that developers really can go in and hone in on a particular piece of hardware, now everything is just so platform agnostic and everything, you lose some of that. You know, I do feel that, see that, and miss that for sure. This is the world we live in. You know, gaming in 2024 is not the same. It's not what we used to have it as. Again, PC thriving still. Everything is on PC now. PC is absolutely first class citizen. You obviously get a full range, a full spectrum of things on a PC, from, you know, full on path tracing stuff to, you know, just super low resolution, but like, you know, super high frame rate stuff if you want that for competitive play. You know, you can get a little bit of everything on a PC. PC is what it is. But again, PC it's always what it is, right? It's going to keep marching forward. This is pretty much it, guys, right? I mean, just sharing my thoughts here. You know, like I said, it's not this year. It's not a ton going on. Not a ton of huge games, I think, to really look forward to this holiday or anything like that. But I think 2025 should be much more interesting for a lot of reasons I already outlined, right? So I am looking forward to that. We also should probably see a Switch 2 next year, all right? And that could be a pretty big deal, of course. So yeah, look forward to 2025. Enjoy whatever it is you're playing in 2024, and let's keep rocking. Till next time, guys. Thanks a lot. Like, subscribe, please. Almost at 1,000. Appreciate it. 2024, for now, game on. Talk to you later.